first of all, there is now political risk associated with being in America, which was never something you worried about before. Look, as a practicing journalist, for the first time in my life, in the last 3 months, I have received briefings from our legal counsel on how to operate in the United States of America.
Welcome to API Futures, a podcast by Ascend where we empower global leaders of tomorrow. Here's our guest host for this episode.
So Farid, for starters, in your book, The Age of Revolutions, you argue that we may be living through one of the most revolutionary moments. Your book was published a year ago. A lot has happened in the past year in terms of geopolitics, the global economy. Are there any conclusions that you drew from your book that you would revise based on where we are today?
No, I'd actually double down on the central thesis, which was, if you look at the period from the fall of the Berlin Wall to the last 10 years, this is a period of extraordinary, revolutionary change. Think about globalization. Think about the explosion of globalization that takes place after the fall of communism. The whole world becomes one market. Think about the information revolution. We create a completely new digital economy that upends the entire old traditional industrial economy. Think about the identity revolution that takes place, the rise of working women, the rise of minorities, the degree to which societies, particularly in the Western world, become multicultural. All these are huge, deep revolutionary changes. And what I said in the book is, these kind of changes always produce a backlash. There is always somebody who feels at the end that, stop the train, I want to get off. This is too much change. And that deep sense of cultural anxiety is what we are living through right now. It's not purely economic. It's important that I just make that point, because people often say, oh, it's all about economically, there are a whole bunch of people who are left behind, or inequality. Well, look at a country like Sweden. Sweden does not have a lot of inequality. It's one of the places in the world that has handled that problem the best. Sweden has right-wing populism just as much as anywhere else. Germany has not lost its manufacturing base, but Germany has right-wing populism, right? France has protected its workers better than almost any country, for better or worse. It's impossible to fire a worker in France. And yet, you have right-wing populism. My point is, what do all these societies have in common? Those features I mentioned, and they all come together in some sense in the face of immigration. Because all these other forces are very abstract. Capital flows moving around the world, tradable goods moving around the world, information technology, software replacing, machines. But what's not abstract is that somebody moves into your town and he looks different and he sounds different, and it's easy to get suspicious, to get fearful, and then it's easy for politicians to exploit that fear. So we are living through an age of cultural backlash. We will get through it, but it's important to understand what's going on.
Right. You put this into context of a cultural backlash, but right now we are seeing a lot of it manifest in this economic upending. I think many people in this room are touched by what's going on with the trade war and tariffs. It's been a lot of unpredictability. One could say volatility, and many business leaders are desperate for some clarity. Now, the administration says this is about short-term pain for a long-term gain of revitalizing our manufacturing base, boosting jobs that have been exported overseas. But from your perspective, where do we go from here in this moment of pain for many businesses?
So I think this entire tariff war has been built on fundamentally flawed assumptions, and therefore it cannot work in any scenario, in my view. The United States today is the greatest economic superpower the world has ever seen. Our technology companies, and I include in technology not just the Googles and the Apples, but the Pfizers, the pharma companies, we dominate the frontiers of technology in the world. Our banks are the most powerful banks in the world. The dollar is the reserve currency of the world. And these gaps have only grown over the last 20 years. In 2008, the Eurozone economy was the same size as the US economy. Today, the US economy is twice the size of the Eurozone economy. In 2000, German wages and US wages were roughly the same. Today, US wages are 50% higher than German wages, than average European wages. For those of you who operate in global companies, you know this because you know the differentials you're seeing. This is premised on the idea that the United States has done badly over the last 30 years, hollowed out its industries, which is a fundamentally false premise. What is true is that manufacturing employment in the United States has gone down. Notice I say employment. Manufacturing output has actually gone up. If you are going to base your trade policy on the quest to bring back manufacturing employment in the US, you are fighting against the tide. It is a losing battle. Do you know how many people work in services in the United States? 80% of American workers. Do you know how many work in manufacturing? 8%. And of that 8%, half, 4% work in marketing, sales, design, branding. In other words, you're talking about something like 7 million people. So you're going to tax the entire population through tariffs to subsidize a dwindling number of manufacturing jobs because you've decided there's something mythical about manufacturing. We used to think this way about agriculture. In the United States in 1900, 50% of the country worked in agriculture. Today, 1% work in agriculture. That is the tide. You can't fight it.
And when it comes to the upending of trade, US-China trade war has been the most intense. I mean, we're talking about 145% tariffs on many goods coming here, 125% for goods going to the other side. And it's not clear at this moment if the two countries are even negotiating. The president says they are, Beijing says they aren't. So
guess who's right?
So many questions there, but the key question is, how do you see this standoff resolving? Will it resolve? Just this morning, the Treasury Secretary said these tariffs are unsustainable for China. Aren't they also unsustainable for us?
Well, this is a good example of when you're going to pick a fight, you really need to do your homework. You need to think through the second and third order implications of where this goes. So, yeah, it's true that China buys more from us than we buy from them. But what do they buy from us? They buy soybeans, they buy agricultural products, they buy basic durables. It's easily substitutable stuff. Instead of getting it from the soybeans from the United States, they can get them from Brazil. What do we buy from China? We buy computer chips. We buy rare earth, refined rare earth. We buy precursors for pharma. Those are not so easy to get. Okay, that's point number one. There's an asymmetry of whether you can substitute these things. Secondly, which is something President Trump should know because he talks about it all the time, Xi Jinping is a dictator. He does not have to worry about the midterm elections. He does not have to worry about public opinion polls. He does not have to worry about the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal writing nasty editorials about him. He does not have to worry about congressmen coming to him and saying, I've just come back from my town hall and they're flailing me alive. None of that is happening in China. So even if you say to yourself, in some broad structural sense, we have the leverage. Who is more insulated from the pain? The rulers of China or the rulers of the United States? And finally, I mean, the Chinese government makes this point, but I hate to say it's true. We started it. So, after having, and you realize why it happened. This is the carefully thought through plan of the United States. So the White House advisors go to the president, give him two plans, two options. One is a 10% across the board tariff on everybody. The other is these very complicated reciprocal tariffs on almost every country in the world, including the ones that are inhabited by penguins. The president decides to do both. The markets freak out. And so he decides he's going to back off of the reciprocal tariffs, but to show that he's tough, that he's not a weakling, he's not caved, he hasn't surrendered. He said, let's go way higher on China. So they go on China, which on reciprocal tariffs it was at 46%, goes to 146%. Now, if somebody had done the math, they would have realized that's actually a bigger hit to the economy than the reciprocal tariffs were. Why? Because, yeah, the tariffs on Madagascar and on Lesotho and Liberia have been taken off. Guess what? We don't buy a lot of stuff from them. We buy almost $500 billion worth of goods from China. So if you do the math, you'd have been much better off with 60% tariffs on Lesotho and 44% tariffs, 46% tariffs on China. So we've done something that has made it much more complicated for us. And as the Chinese say, there's a saying in Chinese apparently, he who ties the knot has to untie it. Sounds pretty rational to me.
I've heard that one before. Maybe I should have. So, so many people in this room who deal with U.S.-China trade and cross-border flows are probably on edge, right? And I've spoken to many of those business leaders. They're waiting for something, right? Who is going to blink first? I mean, how long does this go on for? Because at least the public messaging from the U.S. is that you got to come to the table to us.
Well, the U.S. is dying for the Chinese to make the call. They're all but holding out the phone and saying, "Here, go, here's the number. Please call." Look, I think the Chinese are playing it very tough. They're saying, as I said, you started this. If you reduce some of the tariffs, then we're willing to talk. I think that is likely to be their position. I don't think they're going to backtrack from that. I think Trump has an advantage here, which is that Donald Trump has the ability to change his mind, to change his position, and suffer absolutely no political price for it. I mean, I've never seen a politician like this in my lifetime who can literally go from black to white, and people are like, yeah, as I said before, I like black, and then you change to white, and it's like, white is the best color in the world. So Trump does have that advantage. So it's very difficult to tell where it's going to go, but I would have to assume that there will be some softening of the American position. There's an easy way around this, which I don't know why they haven't thought of it. Ask some foreign country, some government, Saudi Arabia, to host Basant and his counterpart from China, issue invitations to both of them, and say, why don't we have talks? You guys have talks over trade. That way, no one has to go through this crazy business of who called whom first. We're not 16 and in high school. I think they can both accept the invitation, go, start the conversation. But I don't know if it'll happen. But the bottom line is that I think the Chinese have made a calculation that they can suffer the pain longer than the US can. And I suspect that they are right.
We're talking about a lot of short-term change, right? Tariffs are on, they're off, they're on again, there's some exemptions. There's a lot of change happening day by day, month by month. What about the long-term effect here in terms of our allies? How are they over the long term reassessing the reliance on trading with us, having economic relations with us? And what does that mean for our economic dominance and for the dominance of the US dollar?
I think it has created the single worst crisis for America along the lines you're describing in decades. I think this is such a bad idea from the point of view you're describing, and you can see it in the event that just took place today. The election of the Canadian Prime Minister, the election of the new government in Canada. What Mark Carney has been saying, and this is what got him elected, starting at a 25-point deficit in the polls. He was trailing by 25 points, the conservative leader, and he won. And his simple message was, we in Canada made a big mistake over the last 2 decades. We believed that our future lay in integrating our economy, our society, our destiny with the United States. That turned out to be a catastrophic blunder. For the next 20 years, we are going to have to find ways to lessen that dependence, to find new markets, to find new partners, to find new allies. What Mark Carney is saying publicly, European leaders are saying privately. What Mark Carney is saying publicly, even Asian leaders are saying privately. Let me tell you, I talked to a head of government in the Middle East, a close American ally, and he said to me, we're stunned at what you did to your closest allies. He said, look, we know we're not your favorite countries in the world. You deal with us because you have to. But when you put tariffs on Germany, France, Britain, Canada, it makes us think you could do this to us easily. If they're expendable, then where do we stand in the line? And so everyone is asking themselves, do we need to lessen our dependence on the US? So it's likely to be a slow, incremental process. It won't be something all of a sudden, but it's a terrible own goal, because why? I mean, it's like you look at this and think to yourself, why are we doing all this? I mean, I sometimes think to myself, why did Donald Trump not just think to himself, I can deport 2 or 3 million people, I can come out against woke ideology, and I can sit back and take credit for the best economy in the world, which is sort of what he did the first term. But this time he hasn't, and the consequences are going to be very long lasting. Your final thing about the dollar, that's a tough one. It's hard to replace the dollar. What will you replace it with? You can't beat something with nothing. So I tend to be, even though I think we made a lot of mistakes, I think for some reason, divine providence or something, the dollar probably remains reasonably secure. What are you going to invest in if you don't invest in the dollar? The euro, a currency that may not exist 25 years from now, if the Germans and the French and the Italians elect populist leaders who want to break out of the euro. The yen, structurally declining country with demographic disaster. The renminbi, the Chinese won't open their currency to the world. So as Larry Summers says, as long as Europe is a museum, Japan is a retirement home, and China is a prison, the dollar is secure.
I want to ask another question that is relevant, I think, to most people in this room as well, which is, businesses thrive on stability. What would be your recommendation to multinational corporations that are trying to navigate these very complex and unstable times?
Look, first of all, I'm an immigrant and I'm a patriot, and so I don't want to tell businesses, to get out of America. Which, and in any case, I don't think it's the right answer. Look, this is the largest, most dynamic, most prosperous economy in the world. It is still by far the best economy in the world to be involved in. But you are going to ask yourself, first of all, there is now political risk associated with being in America, which was never something you worried about before. And I think we've all experienced it in various ways. Look, as a practicing journalist, for 30 years of my life, I have received briefings from my legal counsel about how to cover what's going on in Turkey because of Erdogan, how to cover what's going on in the Philippines because of Duterte, how to deal with, Mexico under Lopez Obrador, India under Modi. For the first time in my life, in the last 3 months, I have received briefings from our legal counsel on how to operate in the United States of America, on what you should be aware of, what are the possible, things that could happen. That's the first time it's ever happened. So there is, that has changed. I would say, the thing that is likely to get readjusted is this. We've been riding on this extraordinary high. The United States is 4% of the world's population. It's 26% of global GDP. It's 70% of the stock market capitalization of the world. Is that going to continue? I don't know. I mean, it feels like a lot of that is based on enormous faith in the United States, enormous trust in the United States. And it's possible that some of that trust has been damaged.
In your book, though, you run through various revolutions throughout history and you draw some conclusions about how countries can thrive coming out of revolutions. What is it? What does that take? And what do you believe is in the future for the United States?
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, there's only one path. You can't go back. This politics of nostalgia just doesn't work. Think about what I was saying about manufacturing. By the way, the first great age of populism in the United States was centered around agriculture. And what most people don't know is the Smoot-Hawley tariffs of 1930 were put in place to protect agriculture, to bring back these farming jobs that had disappeared during the 20s, which was another great period of revolutionary change. Cars, movies, radio, telegraph, telephone, all that was transforming America, but farm jobs were declining, and the Smoot-Hawley tariffs were put in for that reason. So what you can do is recognize that we're going through a difficult period. People do have this sense of cultural unease. And I think that sometimes the people who are, we have all benefited from all these changes. We don't recognize enough just how disruptive this is. The level of change is hard for people to digest. And it's important, therefore, when you do these things, don't latch on to extreme causes. Don't latch on, don't push, massive cultural transformation on societies where it's hard to take that. And sometimes I feel like people on the left in particular will insist on some of this, what is now called woke ideology, at the expense of common sense. And what they forget is most people look at this and it just adds to their sense of disorientation and cultural alienation, and it becomes easy to caricature. So my advice would be look at the two most successful Democratic presidents in the last 50 years, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. They were careful about their economic policies. They were pro-market. On the other hand, both of them raised taxes so that they could do more redistribution. They were careful culturally to position themselves at the center. Bill Clinton would give these speeches about how much he was in favor of school uniforms. Why school uniforms? It was a way of saying, I'm not a radical. I'm a square. Barack Obama was famously ambivalent on the issue of gay marriage, because you're trying to understand that the center of the country has to be brought along. You can't, you have to bring the country with you. So if you can do that, I think you're going to be much more likely to succeed. Because in the end of the day, what we're doing in the United States is an absolutely amazing thing. And Ascend is so much a part of it. We're building the first truly universal nation. We're building a country where people come from everywhere. And it's not just that they come from everywhere, but they're honored for coming from everywhere. There's a sense in which everyone's participation is valued. And it's hard, it's disruptive. It's a lot of change, but we're doing it, and it's going to happen, and it's inevitable. And as we do it, if we can just keep in mind that, at the end of the day, we're all in this together. We're all trying to build this country so that everyone's children have a better future. I think that more people believe in them than we realize. But we have to be aware. It's a hard challenge, and for some people, it's harder than for others. I'm still very optimistic in the long run. This country has so much change that's taking place for the better. I came here 30 years ago. It's a much better country today than it was 30 years ago.
And I'm watching the clock rapidly ticking down, but you've talked about, your experiences. You said the country's a much better place now than when you first came here. You're tonight being recognized by an organization, to your point earlier, that is about helping each other, making a more equitable future. What does it mean for you to be honored tonight?
I tend to be always a little uncomfortable with these kind of honors. I have to be honest with you, because I am very aware of the degree to which luck has played a part in my life. And I think about, I always think about that when I'm in these kind of situations. And look, you can't do anything about it. I think I was prepared to take advantage of the good luck that happened to come my way, but I was noticed by people at various points. I happened to meet the right person or get the right meeting at various points, and I was ready for it. I worked hard for it, but that sense of being lucky and recognizing that luck plays a part in life, I don't know, it just leaves me thinking we should always try to bring other people along. that's the best way you can you can do something about that reality. Just be humble and recognize that at the end of the day, there was somebody out there who was working just as hard as you were, and maybe they didn't have the lucky break you did, and so maybe you try extra hard to provide and to reach out and to meet people and to see if there's talent out there that you can spot. It's a very I don't know, it's a very awkward thing to get honored for these things, because you, there are lots of people who should be honored in life, and we probably don't honor enough people. I used to always say this at commencement speeches. The people who really should be honored are the parents of the children there, because you have no idea how hard they worked to get you to that place. And yet we're honoring you, and the parents are paying the bills.
Well, thank you so much, Farid. I mean, they do say that success is luck meeting opportunity, and thank you for imparting some wisdom on how we can help each other create our own luck. Thank you again. I'm excited to see the next honorees, and another round of applause for Farid.
Thanks for listening to API Futures, presented by Ascend, where we empower global leaders of tomorrow. Subscribe to API Futures on Spotify, Amazon Music, and Apple.